You're listening to the Unmitigated Podcast, the podcast that brings to light the hidden risks business owners and entrepreneurs take every day that may not be covered by their traditional insurance. Here's your host, Van Carlson.
Hello, welcome to the Unmitigated Podcast. Today we got two great guests to learn more about how we go about changing laws. One is Maggi Lazarus. She's with Minicap. And Peter Dawson is the spokesperson for 831B Institute. Maggie, why don't you go first? You can do a little introduction of yourself, and we'll dive into the podcast here.
Sure. My name is Maggi Lazarus. I'm a lawyer in Washington, D.C. And for the past couple of years, my firm has been representing the Minicap Coalition in their efforts to address IRS enforcement overreach relating to 831B captives, specifically to educate members of Congress on the existence of captive insurance and to let them know about related IRS activities. And more recently this year, we have pivoted to a legislative strategy. We're going to try and get a bill introduced that would address some particular problems with recently issued proposed regs and tee them up for potential enactment as part of what is expected to be a very large tax package negotiated next year. That'll be 2025.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, obviously we're very much involved in that as well. So we appreciate that. Peter, can you give us, what exactly are you doing now?
Man, thank you. So also an attorney like Maggie. Sometimes I say I'm a recovering attorney because I've left the traditional legal profession in terms of being in a law firm and now work as a consultant for primarily business owners and institutions like 831B Institute. But I spent my entire career really in tax law, asset protection, and finance and private equity. And so, unfortunately, tax impacts everything that we do on a daily basis, right? There's nothing that we don't do that's not affected by the tax code in some way. And besides the 80,000 pages of tax law federally, every state has very comprehensive tax codes as well. And so, everything that I do on a daily basis is really helping business owners primarily, but also individuals at times navigate the complexities of the national and state tax codes.
Yeah, that's exciting. What is exciting is risk management.
It's not
to your point though,
but it's critical.
So is risk management, right? I mean, it's all relative, right? And I agree with you 100%. I think it's very difficult as a business owner if you want to try to go out and create real wealth. Taxes have to be addressed. I mean, it's a hurdle factor, right? And so we've been dealing with this since since 2008 when I got into what we do at primary, our company at SRA, utilizing 831B tax code. So no, what's funny is we're really here to talk about how we move this thing along. How do we make some of the things that we're both in, all three of us are interested in doing, is making this a normal business practice for business owners to mitigate risk and take advantage of a tax code, right? To help level out some of the peaks and valleys of businesses, especially with the small to middle market business owners. Just to give you guys, and you guys will hear a lot more about this with us, but the merger acquisitions right now are, over the next staggering statistics out there. I mean, over the next 10 years, 3 million businesses need to sell. They represent $14 trillion of value, and they're currently all owned by people over 60. And one of the biggest hurdles looking into this in the horizon is taxes. How does 831B help with this transition? We need this. I mean, this is becoming a national security issue in my mind, because truthfully, the amount of jobs these people are tied to, they're estimating if they don't do merger acquisition awareness, 80% of them won't sell. They'll just go away. I don't think we can afford that in our country today. And so that being said, Maggie, I know the efforts you're putting in, and getting back to the passing of a bill, right? I always remember reminiscing. Peter's probably too young, but Maggie, I'm going to assume we're kind of similar in age. But I remember Saturday morning cartoons was a big deal.
Sure. Yep.
And they have that one animation of how does a bill get passed in U.S. Congress, right? I mean, Peter, do you remember that? Did you ever see that little?
I did. I'm 45, so I still remember Saturday morning cartoons. I remember those.
Yeah, our kids, Saturday morning cartoons. What you can watch cartoons anytime you want now, but Saturday morning was the morning, right? I mean, it was a big deal.
Absolutely.
Anyway, they had that one thing about the passing of the bill, and I think it's so relevant to this day, obviously, because nothing's changed on the Constitution, thank God. But when it comes to passing a bill, but Maggie, one of the efforts you guys put in as a lobbyist group is, and the fact that we, to your point earlier, that we made some switches this year. Your minicap has to really start to make an impact at the level of. Can you just kind of go into the differences on that and why the effort needs to be brought forward on with legislative changes?
Sure. So, like I said, we started maybe about 2 years ago with just an education campaign, trying to make sure that relevant offices on the Hill understand what 831B microcaptive insurance is, and are aware of IRS efforts to basically eliminate the availability of the tax benefits that were legislated to incentivize small and medium-sized companies to form their own insurance companies when they either can't find coverage that they need in the commercial marketplace or when they can't afford it. It's a niche market. And so we found when we went up there were a lot of offices that had never heard of captive insurance. So educating them on its existence was a preliminary important step. When we were also educating them on what the IRS was up to, the basic feedback was we can ask them questions in the context of our oversight jurisdiction, and we can, encourage them to pull back on their overreaching enforcement activities. But in reality, the IRS is going to do what it's going to do unless and until Congress legislates something that provides a more stable solution to the industry. So this year we are pivoting, like I said, to that kind of a strategy. Practically speaking, what that involves is first finding some members of Congress that are willing to take the lead in developing legislative language. Once you have that, the next step in the process would be to go to an office called Legislative Counsel. There's one on the Senate side and one on the House side. That's an office staffed by attorneys who are experts in drafting legislative language. And you go up and explain sort of the problem to them. Perhaps you would give them some ideas about a solution, or if not a specific solution, how you would prefer that, things would be for the industry. They will draft a bill. Typically, that's a process that takes several back and forth between Hill offices and the Legislative Counsel's office until they get a product that everyone's satisfied with. At that point, because this is a tax bill, it would go to another office called the Joint Committee on Tax. That is staffed with economists, accountants, tax experts, and they're responsible for scoring tax legislation. They don't actually issue an official score until the bill is reported out of committee, but as we all know, anyone who's opened up a newspaper, deficits are an increasing problem at the federal level. And as a result, if you want to have an effective legislative proposal, you have to make sure that it doesn't come with an exorbitant price tag, or else it's just probably not going to be able to be enacted. Then you would introduce the bill. Typically, or often, there would be companion bills in both chambers, so a House bill and a Senate bill. And then it moves through the committee process. So in the House, it's possible to have a bill referred to multiple committees. That sometimes can slow things down, though. So Often people will draft a bill so that it is referred only to one committee of jurisdiction. For tax bills, that's the Ways and Means Committee in the House. On the Senate side, bills are only referred to one committee, and that would be for tax bills, the Finance Committee. The committee will sometimes hold hearings on the issue. Eventually, hopefully, they would mark up the bill and report it out. Markup are when members of the committee are allowed to offer amendments that are voted on in the committee, amendments to the legislation. It doesn't have to be reported at a committee to be taken up as part of a larger package. And typically with tax bills, at least in the modern era, it's unusual in sort of the recent years for tax bills to move as standalone legislation. Instead, what happens is there'll be a larger sort of must-move package. That could be an end-of-the-year appropriations bill, or an end-of-the-year omnibus of some sort, or a very large tax package. And at that point, leadership in that House, the Senate, the White House, and sort of powerful committee members would all be sort of working behind the scenes to figure out what can go in a package that in a tax bill that would considerations relevant to that would be overall cost. There might be some provisions on there that are revenue raisers and others that are an expense to the fisc. And then also what they need politically in order to be able to move the bill. You have to build out a coalition by putting on pieces that people whose votes you need are going to support.
Yeah, so you just described a very, very technical process in my mind, not near as much as the animation video I remember as a kid, but nevertheless. But to your point, though, I mean, they didn't talk about in that animation. There's nothing about talking about lobbyists and crafting bills and just talking about how it passes. What's the likelihood, right? I mean, I know you get asked that question. I mean, part of your job is to bring this thing out from committee and get it to the floor vote. And I think there's got to be a lot of things lined up to make that all happen, regardless of what bill it is or who's bringing what forward. With the Trump tax cuts sunsetting next year, one of the things I'm hearing a lot about right now is estate taxes being a big concern on that. I mean, they could find themselves having estate tax problems real quick, January 1 of 2026, right? People that didn't think they were ever going to have estate taxes just because of their assets have grown to where they've the last couple of years, right? I mean, real estate alone. What's the likelihood? I mean, do you think they'll be forced to bring appropriation bill to the table to where we might have a chance to slide this kind of a thing in, or do you think they'll be just letting? I mean, what's your temperature on that?
I think it's a very high likelihood that there will be some sort of tax package passed next year. The reason being that, as you noted, the 2017 tax bill, the individual provisions included in that bill all were set to sunset at the end of next year. It's politically speaking, neither party is going to want to see individual tax rates increase. And that's why they kept they made the corporate provisions in that 2017 bill permanent and sunsetted the individual ones. The reason they did that is it was passed by a process called reconciliation, which requires that the bill or the components of the bill that is passed via reconciliation hit certain budget targets in a 10-year window. So they couldn't make both components of the tax provisions permanent.
Okay.
How it is enacted next year is really going to be highly dependent on what happens in the elections in November. Mm-hmm. I think that there's, generally speaking, conventional wisdom is there's two possibilities. The Republicans might sweep, meaning they win a majority in both the House and the Senate, and they win the White House, or there'll be divided government. I don't think that anyone really believes that the Democrats have a chance of sweeping. If the Republicans do sweep, then they could use this reconciliation process. What that does is it provides an expedited means of moving legislation through the Senate. In the House, bills pass by a simple majority vote. In the Senate, effectively, though, you need a 3/5 majority or 60 votes to avoid a filibuster. And the reconciliation process eliminates the availability of the filibuster. So things can pass by a simple majority. That, like I said, is how they passed the tax bills in 2017 when Republicans had control of White House and both houses, both chambers of Congress. Sorry. If it is divided government, I think there still will be a bill. It'll be a lot messier and it will require negotiations between the two parties, and how sort of smooth and effective those negotiations go, I think, are going to depend in large part on the specifics of which party wins which and what their majorities are in the Congress.
Sure. Well, pivoting to Peter. Peter, I know you said you're an attorney. Used to be you're still a bar attorney, I believe, right?
Yeah, I'm still an attorney. I just
and I was going to make fun of you guys both being attorneys, but I chose to take a hard. It was too easy, so I just, I didn't want to, because how much I love attorneys. I love attorneys. They're all good. No, you guys bring a unique skill set to the table. I mean, it is what it is, right? It's like risk management. It's like buying an insurance policy. It's what I think both those industries are called a necessary evil, is what I think I've been referenced to in the past. Anyway, but no. So Peter, on 831B Institute, I know you've been involved for a little while. What role do you see 831B Institute playing with helping to move along with what Minicap's doing currently?
Yeah. So Maggie brought up a great point originally of education, right? Unfortunately, because of the complexities of just governing a nation of 330 million people, it's exceptionally complex from a legal standpoint. And, education, in my opinion, is the best sales technique. And I know that sounds like it's a longer process, of course, Van, but the reality is that most people don't know how our republic works functionally. They don't understand the separation of the three branches. They don't understand how legislation is actually made. And so when you look at, if you look at our government today, right, we are actually bankrupt, right? And so when you're balancing, the need to collect tax revenues, right, and you see that $100 trillion, depending on who you're talking to, it's anywhere from 80 to $100 trillion of money that's going to change hands in the next 20 years. Government's going to be looking to collect on that, of course. But you've got to balance that with the purpose of why this was first instituted during the Reagan administration, right? When you look at the 1986 tax code, and because I'm a nerd and I geek out on this, and you look at what was done, it was bipartisan, right? You had the Speaker of the House and Ronald Reagan both saying, we need to do some things that will keep us globally relevant. At the time, if you'll recall, Japan was up and coming, so we rebuilt the Japanese and the German economies. We'd occupied both after World War II. We'd rebuilt them, and Germany and Japan were becoming more than competitors. They were eating our lunch during the 80s and 90s. And so when you look at global relevance from a business and an intellectual capital standpoint, you had all sorts of things like R&D tax credits come out of 1986. You had the captive insurance come out of it. You had a lot of robust measures that were passed in 86 and reaffirmed later, really throughout the last 40 years almost. They've been reaffirmed, and some of them have been codified permanently, like in 2015 with the PATH Act with the Obama administration. And again, even though it's quote unquote captive and R&Ds look more like a Republican initiative, it was definitely a Democratic initiative. And so I think both parties then recognize the importance to make sure that businesses remain viable, even though we understand the counterbalance that the government has to collect tax revenue, right? We all understand that. But really 831B is that how do we educate business owners? How do we educate Congress? How do we educate the layperson that these types of tax benefits aren't just, a loophole or, tax avoidance? It's actually used to help bolster businesses. Because if businesses go bust, I think we all know this, the small business economy of America is the lifeblood of America, right? It's what keeps innovating. It's what, small business hires a small CPA firm, and they hire a small law firm, and then they in turn hire, folks in the community. And it's much more connected and integrated into the communities. And you got tens of millions. I think, I don't know the exact number anymore, Van. You or Maggie might know better, but it's tens of millions of small businesses that really, in my opinion, are the lifeblood of America. And so the 831B really is, designed, we'll obviously work in conjunction with groups like Maggie's, but really the idea is that we're out educating and explaining the necessity and really why it was such a good idea back 40 years ago. Congress saw the need, and Congress has continued to see the need to make sure that businesses remain relevant and competitive in the global market.
It's interesting. We're speaking at M&A events right now. I mean, you're seeing a big spin up on that, watching the periodicals going out there, because, when they talk about this transfer of wealth, to your point, Peter, it's not grandpa dying with an IRA and the grandkids inheriting the money. And that's not the transfer of wealth they're referencing. The transfer of wealth they're referencing is profitable businesses, people that are ran by people that the baby boomers, people born in their 50s, small businesses were started. And to your point about the domino effect, small businesses are dependent on other small businesses. And we have in our presentation, we actually have a slide in there that said $220 billion worth of transactions in 22 did not happen because of the complication of the sell. Because a good example would be like, okay, I'm going to look at a business. And 40% of the revenue is driven by one customer. Well, me as a buyer, that's a lot of risk for me to take on. So we actually are utilizing 831Bs, kind of like a bond type situation, where if the seller is worried about that, or excuse me, the buyer, we can carve out some of the sales proceeds and put it into an 831B and the event of. So we're actually smoothing out the transaction sales. And that's one thing that I think, we got to drive home with Congress as well, Maggie, is that this tool is going to make the transfer of wealth happen, because there's a lot of issues with buying a business. One of the things that was said at this conference, I was just in Denver, and I think our next one's in San Diego, actually this month, was why would you go do a startup when you can buy an existing business? That maybe it's boring, but you know what? I heard it said a long time ago, and somebody's grandfather, the boring the business, the more likely you're going to make money at it. And, you don't need a software company. You don't need to come out with a new product every, because you got an idea in your head. It's like, go buy, if you're entrepreneurial minded or business oriented or wanting to own a business, the first place you should be looking at is businesses that are already in existence and already cashing profit. You're talking baby boomers that typically they kind of hated technology. Let's be honest. But if you can bring some efficiencies into some of these businesses that are out there that are still using paper invoices, which there a lot of them are, these are people that, companies own in their 60s, man, you just got a hell of a lot more opportunity there. So I'm excited about that part of it, but I'm also excited about, over the next 10 years, this needs to happen. And again, I think to all, we're all speaking to each other in the choir kind of thing, but, where the 831B is very, very, can be instrumental in making that happen. Where the transaction now becomes more appetizing for the buyer to buy, or the seller can get a better pricing of the sale of their business because of the way they're going to position an 831B to handle some risk when they're no longer running the company. A lot of these, warranties, when I look at warranties today, they're hugely unfunded with business owners, but they give them out like candy to be competitive, because big corporations do it all the time and they got to be competitive when it comes to warranties. So I'm excited about the future of that as well, just from the bringing those solutions to the table for these business owners. But, to your point, Peter, in 1986, the world was a lot different. Today it's, and hey, global economy and all that stuff is obviously here and it's going to stay here. You've got global warming going on of some kind. Obviously, we know that storms are, it is what it is. We got a huge pressure under traditional insurances today. And, that's one of the things we're seeing a lot when we're going out and speaking at these events, especially with M&A. These are business owners coming to these conferences, learning about how do I go about selling my business. And it's a process. You can't just decide overnight to say, hey, I'm going to sell my company. But anyway, we're excited about that part of it. And that's something that's, I would say, in the last 90 days. And then now I'm starting to pay more attention. And this is becoming a big issue here. And I think, Maggie, from that standpoint, is Congress even aware of this transfer of wealth going on in the country right now? I mean, this is unprecedented, I believe, probably in human history, where we have so many small businesses that really, to Peter's point, have driven our economy. And by the way, these small businesses become large companies. I mean, Micron here in Boise, Idaho, I can tell you the founder of Micron started that company in his garage. He was a small business owner at one point too, right? I mean, that's how small businesses start. They got to start somewhere, right? And so are they even aware of this transitioning thing going on over the next 10 to 15 years where these small businesses in these states that drive payroll, do all the taxes, all the things that we talked about with taxes, are they even aware of some? And by the way, the hurdle factor to sell a business in this country when it comes to the taxes is significant. And anything we can help to smooth that out again just makes the deal possible. And again, I feel like SRA fills that bill really well, utilizing an 831B. But is this even talked about right now on the horizon? I know this is maybe off script a little bit, but I think it's extremely important over the next 10 years is that, keeping these small businesses alive and moving forward.
Certainly, Congress understands that small businesses are the engine of the economy. And I think that's without a doubt, it's established by data and it's unquestioned. As far as what they're thinking about regarding sales of existing businesses, one thing that I think is relevant and notable is in the past, maybe 4 or 5 years, there's really been a developing change particularly in the Republican Party, where we're seeing more populist sort of concerns and approaches to things. And as a result, whereas it used to be sort of Republican orthodoxy that, you would help big businesses survive and thrive, and there'd be trickle down benefits to the little guys. But now I think there is less interest in carrying water for large corporations and more of a focus on small and medium-sized businesses and just regular people, individuals, And I think that combined with, like you were talking about, climate change and the resulting, the economy, higher interest rates, all of that is resulting in a crisis in the insurance and reinsurance industry. That's very similar to what happened in the mid 80s when Congress enacted Section 831B. So it's sort of a perfect storm of things happening that is going to focus attention on small captive insurance and the need for it to continue to be available.
Dan, I do want to point out one thing with small businesses in particular is not enough, in my opinion, not enough emphasis is on velocity of money, right? And you talk about M1 and M2 monetary supply, but you can see historically, Great Depression, Great Recession, anytime you have significant pullback in velocity of money in the economy, you have nosedives in not just tax collections, but also new business development, new business starts, et cetera. And my point in saying that was respect to small businesses, that small businesses actually increase velocity of money. Large businesses tend to hoard cash and they wait till, they can wait years, right? They have the ability to wait a very long time if they want to expand markets, to build factories, to do whatever else. But small businesses don't have that luxury. So small businesses are always, I think of the guy on, when you're pushing the car and you're pedaling, right? You're not actually, it's not a combustion engine, you're pedaling the bike, right? Small businesses are constantly turning cash over. They're hiring people. Those people then spend the money in the economy. It gets dumped back into the economy. And as you know, I know it's sometimes a trope that's used, but the reality is small businesses really do that. They drive the economy and they help keep that velocity of money, that monetary supply, very healthy. And you saw this with the Great Recession. A lot of small businesses went bust. It's why they dumped $10 trillion into the economy during the pandemic, because they basically went the opposite way they did in 2008. And they dumped so much money that we now have hyperinflation in certain sectors. But it was that very real fear that if we have the monetary supply slow down too much and freeze up, and the velocity of money slows down, we're going to be really, really in trouble in a couple of years in terms of just people having jobs and people being able to start the economy.
That's a great point. I mean, velocity of money is a real thing, and it's very difficult. If it stops, it's difficult to start back up. So So no, I think that's a great point. And the other thing is, when it comes to, the education process, Peter, I mean, this is no easy feat. I mean, you got to have willing people to listen that are willing to listen to you. Yeah. And that's a big challenge in itself. And so I think, one of the things we're challenged with is our messaging, right? That you've known our company for quite a long time. It's just like, this is a very, we don't want to sound like we're building a rocket ship, but sometimes inevitably we sound like that to some clients, especially business owners that are busy. I mean, a lot of business owners are working in their business, right? I mean, these are busy people. They know their trade well, and they'd rather go turn a wrench than talk to a customer, truthfully, a lot of them. So, it's what they like to do. And I swear, I think most business owners it's almost by accident they even own the company, right? I mean, it's just it's just an interesting transition in people's lives. How they, how did you come to own this company? You find out they got laid off, and he said, "Oh, I would just go start a company." I mean, it's literally, especially anyway. That being all said, I mean, one of the things that we're seeing out there, and I'm encouraged by it, is, and again, this may be do you think business owners are going to be more likely to listen to at a certain point when it comes to, because here's the thing, when we talk about our clients are typically in their 50s and 60s. They are the baby boomers. And they've put everything, sweat, blood, and tear back into their business. And now they're looking at it going, how do we get out of here? They don't have a pension. They didn't work for the government, get a pension. They didn't work for big corporations, and a lot of them don't even have 401ks. Their money is wrapped up in their business. Do you think, there's a lot of business coaches out there. I mean, you're seeing a lot of that stuff going on right now. I mean, are we going down this road where, people have more open ears to listen to things like this, mostly out of necessity?
Yeah, I think anytime there's chaos, which we have a lot of chaos currently in the U.S. and globally, right? I think that people are more willing to hear when things are chaotic, right? People only change because of pain. People do not change when things are going well. And so, historically, I can tell you, I don't want to speak here for Maggie, but as a lobbyist, a lot of people just kind of roll their eyes on lobbyists, right? But what people don't understand is lobbying is critical. Because of the complexity, you need subject matter experts like Maggie and her firm to go in and say, hey, Congress, hey, American consumer, hey, American business owner, it's really important that you guys pay attention to this section of the tax code, that you talk about captive insurance, and you talk about, the intersection of tax and law and finance and insurance, because it's a very complex area of law, right? And so to your point, man, it's very difficult at times to pull back and say, how do we make this really complex thing very simple? But at its core, it is simple, right? What we're saying is, hey, business owner, you have these risks that are real tangible risks. Like, they exist. And you don't have an adequate mechanism that your current advisors have told you about But Congress 40 years ago actually created a mechanism that works. And yeah, there's lots of things. You got to get CPAs involved, and you got to get insurance companies involved. You got to get lawyers involved typically. But at its core, that's what it is. It's right. How do we mitigate risk? How do we mitigate known risk that's fortuitous in nature that you can't solve through just, building another factory, right? How do we go in there and solve this problem? And the frustrating thing for me, Van, is that Congress already solved this 40 years ago. Yeah. It's that you've got the IRS in particular, but you have other groups that are going, we don't really like that. And I always go, yeah, but the Taxpayer Bill of Rights says you don't have to like it. You have to enforce it. Like, you have to follow the rules that Congress set out. And so that's again, I've been through full IRS audits for clients. And so a lot of times it's trying to help the agency, the service, I should say the service, not the agency, that's not CIA stuff. There's the service and the IRS agent understand, hey, look, this is the tax code. This is what Congress said. We're trying to follow it. Help us comply, right? And really, you see this in all organizations, right? You see drift, right? You see drift often when people don't adhere back to and refer back to the values, right? So the Taxpayer Bill of Rights is one. Also going back and saying, hey, it's not our job to have biases and to enforce, what we think it should happen. It's to do what Congress said we're supposed to do. That's the frustrating part. That's why Maggie's on the Hill lobbying, because we're basically saying, hey guys, y'all passed this and you're not following what Congress said. You've interjected your own biases, your own opinions, your own agenda, shall we say, into the tax code and into the enforcement of the tax code. And so with that much power, you've got to have people pulling back, because if you have the power to literally destroy a business or an individual, that needs to be that power needs to be really thought through. And there's got to be checks and balances. There has to be accountability. Like, accountability is good for everyone. I know people don't like accountability, but that's actually a positive. Accountability is necessary. And that's really what groups, ours is more educational. Maggie's group is more on the enforcement arm of the accountability, of trying to help people go, hey, Congress, hey, IRS, you guys need to be held accountable. Where my job's, I think, easier than Maggie's, which is more just educating business owners, educating, other folks in the industry.
No, that's all well said. I think to Maggie's point earlier, I mean, we do have kind of a perfect storm coming. I mean, from almost the same identical markets that drove the code to begin with, and then on the complexities of life, right? Between cyber, global, supply chain, brand protection. I mean, all those other things. And then you put on top of that, to your point about the Chevron case that's coming up, that hopefully the Supreme Court releases out that brief this summer, I'm told, where the federal bureaucracies could be pulled back just naturally now, going on that case alone, where the federal courts don't get to decide. They have to favor, if I understand that right, and correct me, you guys are attorneys, so you guys can correct me on this, that basically they had to give the benefit of the doubt to the bureaucracies who were enforcing the laws based on how Congress wanted them to be enforced, or how they wanted them passed. And so that can certainly be interesting that could be an interesting development for us down the road in court cases, when federal judges are pretty much said, hey, I get to interpret what Congress's intent was, not the bureaucracies. I don't have to give that benefit of the doubt to them anymore. I think that's going to be huge for the taxpayers down the road, potentially. That's a whole nother issue in itself. But to your point, Peter, I think that's going to be a good thing. I want to wrap this up real quick with you guys, and certainly appreciate you guys taking the time in your busy day to spend some time with us. But, Maggie, one of the things that we say all the time, we want to make this a normal business practice. And I'm going to ask the same question to both of you guys. What's the likelihood of that to happen? that this becomes a normal business practice where if you're going to be a successful enterprise, you offer a 401k to your employees, but at the same time, you're doing an 831B to make sure the business is around, to make sure it funds the 401k. What do you think? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, first I'll say I'm sort of representing the industry in advocacy. I'm not in the trenches like you are, actually sort of creating these insurance companies and advising businesses directly. But I mean, Congress incentivized it. It has continued to incentivize it and refuse to pull back on it in any significant way, with the small exception of some targeted guidelines to prevent fraudulent use of these entities. I think that in the current environment, it's a logical tool to be continued and increasingly expanded, expanding the availability of it to small and medium-sized businesses, particularly considering the current problems with finding adequate insurance and affordable insurance coverage.
Yeah.
Yeah. So same question. It's interesting you reference the 401k. No one ever talks about a 401a, for example, which is the section of the tax code, right? It's section 401. But similar to that, the 831 section also wasn't really super well defined. So 401ks, those administrative rules all came after the fact, right? If you actually look at the history, a lot of it was unknown essentially, and was, Congress and the IRS and the industry working together to formulate bright line rules on how that should look, how a 401a and everything underneath that section should look. And it's no different underneath 831, 831A, 831B. The reality is that it's been in place for 40 years. The IRS should have done something by now that was a little more in depth in terms of bright line rules, frankly. So in my opinion, they've abdicated their job and their responsibility, their duty, their obligation, whatever you want to call it. Laws come, there's rights underneath laws, there's responsibilities underneath laws. Everyone talks about rights a lot of times, but they don't focus on responsibilities. And frankly, that's where what's missing is the responsibilities of the service to put bright line rules in place. Again, I think I've said this before, and probably numerous times at the Institute, we're fine with eliminating bad actors from the ecosystem. We prefer it. So, no one's looking for a tax dodge here. We're looking for fair rules that are easy to follow. And I think that's how it happens, Van. I think that it's really saying, hey, look, this is not going away. Congress has authorized it. It helps our businesses stay viable. It helps our businesses stay relevant, helps our businesses mitigate risk that's just unforeseen. And frankly, when you look at the global economy, insurance really is the backbone of economies. It's not even banking. And I can give you lots of data in a separate podcast about that. But insurance really is the lifeblood of the U.S. economy. And, it's all about mitigating risk. And so I think that as business owners see that Congress is stepping up more to the point of your question and passing laws and putting some bright line rules in place, it'll become much more common. I think it won't be what are you talking about? It will be, oh yeah, we set that up 2 years ago and we have these policies in place to protect against the next pandemic and protect against the next governmental interruption where the government shuts down the world, or supply chain risks that are becoming more and more unpredictable, frankly, with the chaos in the world. So I think this is a no-brainer for Congress to take action on. I think they'd be foolish to ignore the burning fire that is, all the things we're talking about, from global pandemics to wars to, frankly, political chaos, man.
Yeah. And like I said earlier, the transition of businesses that need to stay alive.
Absolutely.
So I think so hey, I appreciate you guys taking the time. It's been fun. I find it interesting. I get kind of nerded out like Peter does on this stuff. Because I've been called the evangelist of 831B. Peter, you wait till you get that title.
Yeah.
But no, I am.
Not yet.
You guys know I'm a firm believer in this. I think we've made a big impact on clients. God forbid, when they do need these things, it's not a good day. And we've been able to keep them afloat when maybe they wouldn't have. They simply would have gone away. So that makes you a believer really quickly in this code. So again, I appreciate you guys taking the time. I know it's called Unmitigated Podcast. It's our second one, just so in case you guys wondered. We had some technical difficulties earlier, but we made it through there. And I appreciated you guys taking and showing patience with us on that. So Maggie, Peter, thanks for joining us. And we'll talk to you guys soon.
My pleasure. Thanks, man.
Thank you.